Once upon a time. As soon as I say those words, you know what's coming, right? Yeah, a story. I don't know about you, but when I hear those words, I tend to feel pretty good. Those words immediately take me to times I spend with my boys and I share a story with them. And today we're going to begin telling a very special story. And I love this story because it's a great story and it's a true story, but most of all, I love this story because it is the story of everything. See, we believe that what we believe as a community is not just a series of propositions and beliefs to be affirmed or recited like a creed. We believe that what we believe is a story. But we believe that this is one continuous story from beginning to end, and it's a great story. Now, think with me about great stories. Personally, I love watching movies. I think what makes movies great is not just about great acting or directing or special effects. I think that great movies are usually great because they're great stories. They're stories of adventure or suspense and danger. They're twists and turns. There's a struggle between good and evil. There's a hero or maybe band of heroes that go up against insurmountable odds. Movies like Braveheart, Gladiator, and Batman, they all have that. But so do Gone with the Wind, Titanic, and Sleepless in Seattle. Doesn't matter whether it's a shoot-'em-up action movie or a chick flick, all great movies have a combination of ingredients and elements that make a great story. And we believe that what we believe is a story. A great story, a true story. It is the story of everything. So here we go. The story of everything starts in this way. In the beginning. And that's a huge way to begin our story because in the beginning actually means before the beginning. Before there was anything. It's kind of hard to process, but the story of everything begins with the chance to peer into when before there was anything. And it says, in the beginning, God. So important. Before there was anything, there was someone. And this someone is the main character in the story of everything. If this is Gladiator, this is where you meet Maximus. If this is Titanic, this is where you would meet Jack and Rose. And if this is my favorite movie, the greatest movie of all time, this is where you meet Harry and Lloyd. In the beginning, God. Now, Genesis was originally written in the language as the Hebrew language. And the word for God here in Hebrew looks a little something like what you see on the screen. And if you spelled it in English, it would appear like this. It's the word Elohim. Elohim, God. Elohim created the heavens and the earth. And the word for create is the word bara. Repeat that word after me, bara. Bara is really a powerful word. And so we're learning about our main character, Elohim bara, in verse 1. And then in verse 2, it says that the spirit of Elohim is hovering over the face of the waters. So this Elohim that creates has some sort of spirit. And then in verse 3, it says that Elohim speaks. So Elohim that creates has a spirit and some sort of word. God speaks. He says, let there be light. And there was light, and it was good. God says, let there be sky and ocean and land, and there was sky and ocean and land. And it was good. And this God says, let the oceans be full of fish and swimming creatures, and let the skies be full of birds and flying creatures. God says, let there be animals, let there be livestock, let there be wild animals, let there be animals that crawl on their bellies on the ground. Let there be small dogs whose owners dress them in little sweaters at Christmas time. And God says, that's a little weird. But nevertheless, he says, it's good. And then God says, let us make man in our image. Huh? The story says us, our. That may sound a bit weird to us, but in the original language in Hebrew, us and our fit grammatically because the word for God, Elohim, is actually plural. But it doesn't mean gods, because the verb tenses and adjectives that go with the word God are all singular, referring to one someone. So this main character in the story of everything, we got to get this. Only this story claims this. In the story of everything, God doesn't mean some old guy in the sky that talks a lot like Morgan Freeman. This God is a we that says our, and yet still is one being. And that's not just a Genesis 1 thing. In one of the very first books of the New Testament, the Gospel of John, the first words of that book are, "In the beginning." Sound familiar? And it says, "In the beginning was the Word." In Genesis, it says, "In the beginning, God speaks." And in John, it says, "In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And this Word is not an it. This Word is a He. See that? He was with God in the beginning. Through Him, all things were made. Without Him, nothing was made that has been made. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. This Word that was with God, that was God, becomes a human being and dwelt among us and has a name. Maybe you've heard of Him. So this God is a someone and yet three someones. And I know all the accountants and math teachers are saying, but that's not possible. But before we get stuck on how it's not possible, we got to get what this is saying about God. This is saying that God is a community of oneness. God is a community of persons. And all that God does and all that God is, He does so and He is so in the context of community, in relationship. And to understand the story of everything, we've got to understand what this community is and what this community is all about. This community of oneness is a community of grace. And by grace, I don't mean a prayer that you say at the table before eating or how you get saved from your sins like in Amazing Grace. Before there was anything, there was a community of grace. And that grace is described in this way. The story of everything says that the Son glorifies the Father. It says that the Father glorifies the Son, and that the Spirit glorifies the Son. It also says that this whole glorifying thing has been going on from all eternity, before there was anything. So to understand this community of grace, we got to understand the word glorify. To glorify someone or something means to praise and to enjoy and to direct attention to them. Most of all, it means to delight in them. And to glorify something or someone, you have to serve them or defer to them. That's why Jesus said, "I do not seek to please myself, but to please Him who sent me." So before the beginning, before there was anything as we know it, there was this community that glorifies each other, that revolves around each other. No one makes the others revolve around him. Each person in the community of grace, also known as the Trinity, they love, they delight, they serve each other. And here's why this matters so much. The story of everything is about a community of grace. A community of loving persons who seek the highest good of each other. Now back to the math. How can 3 be 1 and 1 be 3? And even if I could get that, why does it matter? Good question. Some people try to understand the community of grace, the Trinity, by saying that it's like an egg. You have the yolk, the white, and the shell. 3 parts, but kind of still one. Others would describe it like water. It can be liquid. It could be vapor when it's steam. It can be solid when it's ice. Again, kind of 3 parts that are still kind of one of the same. I like to think about it as cheese, sauce, and crust because there has to be some sort of connection between God and pizza. But truthfully, all of these analogies break down at some level. But that's okay. What we need to know is not how it's possible for God to be three and still one. What we need to know is that the Trinity means that the universe comes from a God who is relational to his core. That the center and the source of the universe is this community of joyous, jubilant, self-giving love. See, the community of grace, the Trinity explains why we believe that God is love. Now I realize that most people believe in God of some kind, a higher power, a supreme being. And I would think that most people would say that God is a God of love. But the story of everything doesn't say that love is something that matters to God or that love is what God does or wants us to do. It says love is what God is. And this is why understanding that God is a community of grace is so important. Because for love to be real, there has to be someone both to give love and to receive love. And if God is singular and alone before the universe was made, how could God be love? See, the doctrine of the Trinity is completely unique. Christ's followers alone among the world's faith believe that God always was, always is, and always will be in a relationship with himself. He is relational to his core. And so the story of everything, God is truly love. God doesn't start loving after he creates something or someone to love. Love is what God is and has always been. He is a community of grace. When God says, "Let us make man in our image," is telling us that we are a reflection, an image of what God is. This is telling us that about where we came from. In the story of everything, love is where you came from. As the God of the universe is a community of grace, our lives are meant to be joining in that community. Love is not just an important part of your story. It's meant to be your life story. Loving and being loved. And this has profound implications for what it means to be a person of faith. It means that we were never meant to relate to God like one would relate to a genie in a bottle who grants wishes or some sort of cosmic Santa who hands out good gifts, based on whether somebody was naughty or nice. It means that God is not just a force to be reckoned with in the universe. The God in the story of everything meant for you to be loved by him and to love him back. That's why Jesus said that the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. It's not about believing in God or doing what God wants you to do. It's about being loved by him and choosing to live a life of loving him back. That's meant to be my story. And the doctrine of the Trinity tells us about our relationship with each other. That since we are made in the image of God, loving each other is not just a good thing or a rewarding thing. It's what we were made to do. That our relationships are meant to be a reflection of the community of grace. That's why as soon as Jesus said, "Love God with all you got," he immediately added, "Love your neighbor as yourself." It's not just doing like saying what to do. He's saying how we're made. That we were made to love and to be loved by God, and you were made to love and to be loved by others. And this matters so much because we live in a culture that says that the story of your life is mainly about getting what we want. And sure, love is high on that list of what we want, but the story is still about me and whether or not I get what I want. But the story of everything right from the start calls me to enter into another story. The story that life is about a community of grace, about loving God and loving people. And if the story of my life becomes mainly about money or power or comfort or accomplishment, instead of loving God and loving people, my story will dash itself on the rocks of reality. Because the story of everything is the story of the community of grace. One of my favorite authors sums up the plot of the story of everything in this way. He says, the aim of God in history is the creation of an inclusive community of loving persons, with himself included as its primary sustainer and most glorious inhabitant. So that's how the story begins. With this mysterious community of grace, relational to the core, creating everything to be an extension of that community. And in the beginning, it was so, and it was so good. That's how the story began. But something obviously went terribly wrong. And every great story has conflict and tragedy in it, and in the story of everything, the love and the community this world had, from the very beginning, it was lost. But God didn't give up and has been working ever since to restore all of creation to the community it was meant to be. In the story of everything, God the Son becomes the one to bring us and everything else back to the place it was originally meant to be. The story says that this is how God showed his love among us, that he sent his one and only Son into the world that we may live through him. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and he sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. What does that mean at a practical level? I like the way that one author put it. He said, if God had a wallet, your photo is in it. If God has a refrigerator, your picture's on it. If there was a tree in heaven, he would carve your name in its trunk. Flooded by emotion, overcome by joy, the star maker turns to us one by one and says, "You are my child. I love you dearly. And though you've walked away from me, I've made a way back. Can anything make me stop loving you? Find your answer on a splintered cross on a craggy hill. That's how much I love you." Anybody who knows me knows that I'm a huge fan of the late Brennan Manning. Brennan Manning was a writer and a speaker who went around the country leading spiritual retreats. He would, and then the participants would go off and by themselves, and they would journal about what they were experiencing with God. And then they would come back and they would share their experiences. And as Manning remarks, he says at one of these retreats one summer in Iowa, he was there with a woman that he just called Christine. She was a nun. And when it was her time to share, when it was Christine's turn, she would say, "Man, I got nothing. I don't have anything to share. I'm not hearing anything. I'm not really feeling anything. I must be doing something wrong." And Manning would always affirm her and say, No, it's okay. It's just different for you. It'll come." And when they went through the whole weekend, and each time it was Christine's turn to share, she'd say, "I got nothing." Then the last day, he spoke, and everybody went off to journal, and then they came back, as they always did. And when it was Christine's turn, Manning said, "Anything you want to share?" She says, I don't really know how to explain it. It was like a dream. I was asking God to show me and to help me understand what I'm missing. And suddenly it was like I was transported to this huge dance hall, like a ballroom. And everyone was dressed so elegantly, and they were all dancing. All around me, everyone was dancing, beautiful dances, perfectly. Nobody missed a single step. And I went over and stood against the wall for what seemed like a very long time, all by myself. And then this gentleman came up to me. He was wearing this striking black tux, and he had a red flower. And he came to me and said, "Can we dance?" And I said, I'm not very good. And he said, "It's okay. I'll lead." And he took me out on the dance floor, and we began to dance. And we spun and we dipped, and it was amazing. And as we danced, everyone else just formed a big circle around us. And when the song ended, everyone applauded. And the man looked at me and said, "Thank you for that dance." And as he looked at me, suddenly I knew who he was. It was Jesus. And he said, "And let me tell you one more thing." And he bent down and he whispered in my ear, Christine, I'm wild about you. She said, I know it sounds odd, but it's true. He said to me, I'm wild about you. I know that I'll never be the same again. In the beginning, God. The love of God, the community of grace, is where you came from. It's the story of everything. And as difficult and pain-filled as the story of our lives can so often be, there's one who says, I'm wild about you. May you and I join the dance and embrace the story of everything. May you and I take our place in the community of grace.